Hey folks, I wanted to create this video just to talk about the high bar squat versus the low bar squat. Now before I continue, I know a lot of people have been trying to contact me in my Facebook Messenger account, and I just want to apologize because I don't have access to my Messenger right now. So if anybody has any questions, just feel free to leave a comment in the comment section and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. So I wanted to delve into this subject because a lot of people have been criticizing my comments on lifting videos about the low bar squat, and I figure that if they're going to click on my profile, this is a good chance to explain my position on the low bar squat. So I want to disclose that even though I'm not a fan of the low bar squat, I have nothing against lifters who do the low bar squat. There's a lot of lifters whom I admire who do the low bar squat, very impressive lifters, but I do not think that people do it for the right reasons in most circumstances. I think there's a lot of misinformation that I'd like to address about the low bar squat in this video right here. So the low bar squat was made popular by Mark Rippletits in the last decade with his Starting Strength book, and there's been several editions of it since. And in addition to the low bar squat, which he advocates, he also recommends the 5x5 program, which is a fine program for novice and intermediate lifters. But I think I want to state that when it comes to like any kind of program, any program will work provided that you're incorporating progressive overload. So there's no such thing as any kind of magic set or rep number will develop you strength. Otherwise, everybody would be doing that. I mean, just so long as you're doing some new dynamic every time you come to the gym or every week or so, whether it be another rep or like, you know, more weight, then you'll make gains provided that you're putting emphasis on your recovery and that your nutrition plan is solid. So with that out of the way, going back to the low bar squat. The low bar squat is something that's becoming increasingly popular, mostly with novice and intermediate lifters, because it allows them to lift a lot more weight. And I can understand that, because, you know, it feels good to be able to have heavy loads on your back. It does a lot for your ego and your and just your confidence to be able to lift heavier loads. Like a lot of people will say, I added like 50, 60 or more pounds to my squat when I switched from high bar to low bar. And a lot of people don't even start with high bar. They just go straight to low bar once they're, even though they're total beginners with the lift as it is. So a lot of people lift more weight with a low bar squat, but they have the false notion that somehow this translates into more strength. And even Mark Rippetoe says this in his book. He says that you can lift heavier loads, so that means it's better for developing strength, which I think is absolute bullshit, because then you've basically justified quarter squatting to every lifter in the country, every lifter in the world. You've basically made a case for the leg press over the squat, since a lot of people can leg press more than they can squat. Heavier loads doesn't necessarily mean it's better for developing strength. You have to look at the mechanics involved in each individual lift, and I think that the low bar squat is performed in a way that's so mechanically different from the high bar squat that it allows you to lift more weight at the expense of good form. So let's go over the low bar squat's mechanics compared to the high bar. So, you know, with the high bar, you have to place the bar directly on top of your trapezius. You want to keep your torso as upright as possible, and you're going to have a lot of flexion from the knees. You really push your knees forward, and you just push your hips back a little bit. And this obviously requires really good ankle flexibility, and it's a very, very difficult movement to perform if you're doing it all the way down. But it's also a very good exercise for developing almost every muscle in the body, especially in the quadriceps, gluteals, hamstrings, back, everywhere. So it's a very, very good measurement of total body strength in the gym. Now, in contrast to that, with a low bar squat, you actually limit your range of motion in some of the joints, notably the knees. So the low bar squat is popular with people who have poor ankle flexibility, poor dorsiflexion, because they just have to push their hips back a lot farther, and they place the bar actually lower on their back, like behind their trapezius and on top of their posterior delts, in order to keep the bar over their center of gravity. But they have very little flexion from the knees and a lot more flexion from the hips. So instead of the torso being very vertical, it's more of a horizontally loaded exercise. And as a result of that, during the concentric phase, when they're going back up, there's a lot more back extension, and that extra back extension is probably what allows them to lift a lot more weight compared to a high bar squat, and they interpret that as being a more posterior chain dominant exercise where they're working the glutes and the hamstrings more, and they're not taking into account the extra back extension and how much that's assisting them in the lift right there. And, you know, maybe they're right. Maybe it actually does work the glutes and hamstrings more. I mean, I've never seen any electromyography results, any EMG tests that show that you have greater myofibular recruitment from the low bar squat and the glutes and the hamstrings compared to the high bar squat. But let's just assume for the sake of argument that they are. The problem with that is that there really is no substitute to developing quadricep strength compared to the high bar squat. So even if you're doing something good for your posterior chain with a low bar squat, if that becomes your sole squat right there, then you're doing a disservice to your quadriceps, because there's plenty of things you can do for your glutes and hamstrings already. You can do glute ham raises, you can do hamstring curls, you can do Romanian deadlifts, you can do good mornings, you do deadlifts, trap bar deadlifts. There's a shit ton of things you can do. But I challenge anyone to find any exercise that's as effective effective for developing the quadriceps compared to the very, very deep high bar squat. I mean, that's the exercise that allows you to lift the most amount of weight in a very orthodox fashion, where you're going really, really deep. I mean, you can do things like a hack squat, but a hack squat doesn't have nearly as much knee flexion or extension, so I don't think that would be nearly as effective either. So if you're doing something like a low bar squat as your sole squat, and you're already doing a deadlift, then, you know, what's the point? That seems kind of redundant right there. Why not do a high bar squat and a deadlift, and then you have a much more balanced strength training program? And, you know, a lot of people will come to the justification, well, you know, I'm a powerlifter, I'm an elite powerlifter, I want to lift as much weight as possible. And, you know, that may work for some people, and if you're training it as a competition lift, that's fine. I understand. It's your sport, it's kind of your job for a lot of people, so you go ahead and do what you want to do. However, this may not necessarily work well for everybody, and a lot of people don't know there's actually a lot of powerlifters who will do high bar squats. I've seen Pete Rubish do high bar squats at meets before, and the reason why is that since the low bar squat has a hip torso angle that's so similar to the deadlift, it can actually kind of adversely carry over into the deadlift if you're doing a meet right there, and it may make one of those lifts suffer as a result of that, because the low bar squat, in terms of its mechanics, it's very similar to the deadlift, except for the way you load the lats, obviously picking up the bar from the ground as opposed to loading it on top of the axial skeleton right there. So if you're doing like a really, really heavy low bar squat, you may actually suffer a few kilograms off of your deadlift as a result of doing the low bar squat. So don't assume automatically that just because you're like a power lifter, that means you have to do a low bar squat. So really, if your goal is just to get as strong as possible, do deadlifts, do squats, but choose the high bar squat because it has enough diversity and it's distinct enough from the deadlift that you'll get a much better, much more balanced strength training workout, incorporating both the high bar squat and the deadlift into your routine, as opposed to doing two structurally very similar exercises like the low bar squat and the deadlift. So yeah, that's all I want to say about that. I mean, you guys can do what you want. If you want to do low bar squat, that's fine, but that's my rationale behind the high bar squat and why I think it's a superior exercise for most lifters. All right, thank you.